Joe is also co-founder of Palantir, a multi-billion-dollar software company, and was twice appointed the youngest member of the Forbes 100 Smiles list. Joe also went to Stanford, where he graduated in computer science. Rodrigo Xavier is a fellow at Stanford's Distinguished Career Institute. Before that, he worked in Brazil's financial industry for over 25 years. He was CEO of Bank of America Merrill Lynch Brazil, founding partner of Vinci Partners, CEO of UBS Pactual, and senior partner of Banco Pactual. Please join me in welcoming Joe Lonsdale and Rodrigo Xavier.
It's kind of overwhelming to see so many faces that I know here in front of me. But anyways, I think you guys are for a real special treat with my good friend Joe here. To put some background, I arrived here at the Valley to take my sabbatical and join Stanford this a couple of years ago. And I had the privilege to meet extremely bright people, people that are shaping the world, they have taught me some amazing things, have scared me, about the pace and about the depth of this transformation, this revolution that we're living. And I was very happy when Joe accepted, to come and talk to you, because it's definitely the guy for me that symbolizes this new generation that's changing the world in a very good and effective way. So, I'll try to make sure that I just let Joe speak here, because there's not much that I can add to whatever he's going to say. Let's go straight to this, Joe. Just to give our audience some background, it would be great if you could tell us some of the major trends in technology that are disrupting traditional industries, both here in the Valley, but also everywhere else in the world.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Rodrigo. It's no surprise to see so many amazing people here, something that you helped put together. But that's a big question in terms of the major trends, but it's a fun question because there's lots of possible angles which you can look at it. The angle we tend to use the most is the idea of kind of going back and replacing the information infrastructure in most major industries. So I think the most interesting thing happening in the last decade or so here and around the world, if you look at any big industry, healthcare, logistics, finance, retail, anything else, the infrastructure itself that runs that industry was mostly built in the 1970s, 1980s, in the very first wave of enterprise software. And the very old enterprise software is very good at doing its job. That's why it's still around. It's very good at doing linear things from A to B to C, like data warehousing, inventory, etc. It's very bad at solving nonlinear problems. It's very bad at letting people ask questions. And as there's this explosion of information in the world, the way in which we should be running almost all these industries should be a lot more dynamic, should allow a lot more intelligence, a lot more creative thinking. And the technology to power that kind of creative thinking and fix these processes is spreading everywhere. And I think that's the most interesting kind of wave that we're seeing right now.
One of the biggest problems we have in Brazil is that companies are struggling to reframe their structures and process to match technological advances around them that they face. In other talks, you always talked about the culture of experimentation, which, by the way, we talked a little bit earlier when Scott Cook was here today, and the process of iteration. Could you elaborate on some common practices that have been adopted across different industries to encourage innovative technologies?
Sure. Well, Scott's a mentor of mine, so I would definitely defer to him what he said. But I guess my view on that is maybe slightly obnoxious. But I think the idea is to make sure there's as few bureaucrats and committees and lawyers in charge as possible, and as many people who are independent. One of my favorite quotes from Apple is this, Steve Jobs said, if you put a committee in charge of designing a horse, you're going to get a camel. You're not going to get a horse. And I think in general, it's very, very hard for a big corporation to actually let someone have full accountability and full control of an independent area. But that's definitely the way Apple did it. That's definitely the way a lot of our companies, as they get bigger, have to do it. You need independent controlling. You need accountability. You can't have something where everyone gets to reach in and get their say and then check things along the way. It has to be something that's operating in isolation. So I think most big companies fail because they're not willing to let someone experiment, let someone be bold, and run with something for a while and try to hit some goals. And the other side, of course, is those people who are running with it need to feel ownership, need to feel a culture of stewardship, a culture where they're going to benefit and they're going to be accountable for the failure or the success. And so I think equity cultures are very, very helpful for innovation, because equity cultures aligned ownership. We used to do a lot in China, and I'd go there 10, 15 years ago, and everyone would say, you know, Joe, China is different than America. You don't understand. Here, people don't need equity. It doesn't mean anything to them. And my answer, which was, turned out I think is correct now, is obnoxious at the time. Like, no, actually, you don't understand. Until you teach them that they do need equity, you're never going to have the right kind of innovation. You're never going to have the very best innovations. You're not going to have ownership cultures. And you definitely see now the very best companies there, all the startups, the best companies there have ownership. And I think this is a universal human value, is a culture of ownership is extremely important to truly get and harness the best innovation.
As you know, one of the areas we address in this conference is fintech, and there's a lot of fintech folks that are here in the audience. And as I understand, you're a big investor in fintech, and despite the big rise in fintechs and the efforts of traditional financial companies to innovate, you always say that we still have a long way to go as far as innovation in the financial industry. What do you expect to be the biggest disruptions in financial service industries in the next few years?
Sure. Well, I'm definitely always pretty obsessed with fintech among other areas. The reason finance, I think, is so important is it's the most interesting meta industry. I obviously care a lot about health and education and government, but I think a lot of people intuitively forget that finance is also a meta industry. If you fix finance, you get everything else to work in the economy better as well, right? So making finance even work a little bit better. And you say, okay, what does that mean? What is finance? Well, finance is a lot of things, but the reason you want smart people in finance is you're allocating the world's resources, right? If you have, unless you have maybe a socialist economy, which obviously doesn't work too well, you have to have a market economy. The market economy, everything's being allocated by finance. So the question is, how are you providing these products and services to the money? How are you getting smart people to allocate the money to go where it should go? And you look at how finance works right now, and just from an information theory perspective, how quickly can the money go to the places it should be going? And it's gotten a lot better with great private equity funds and venture capital funds and other groups, but it's still extremely slow, extremely inefficient. And these old banks have these huge barriers to entry, and they're just kind of like their own separate walled cities with their own kind of infrastructure built up over 100, 200 years. And the way information flows between them, the way decisions are made, is clearly not correct, right? It's clearly, and there's 7,000 custodians in America. It's very, very difficult to have the data flow smoothly, even to see what you own as a large pension or endowment, let alone make these decisions. Like the way it all connects is very poor. And so obviously to fix this, you need to fix the information infrastructure, first of all, then that allows different types of innovation. Just in the last 3 or 4 years, I've started to see some of my biggest tech companies get banks to put things in the cloud. So just in the last 3 or 4 years, you're starting to go to the cloud with the biggest banks. It's still very slow, it's still very behind. And they're risk averse for obvious reasons, but they're also giant bureaucracies, right? So I think as you start to put more things in the cloud, as you start to have more open utilities, you're going to start finally seeing apps in finance where the app can be used between the banks, and start applying to lots of these types of things. I think you're just at the beginning of the transformation there, and you can see it in the sense of how inefficient finance is compared to what it could be.
Another focus here on the audience is healthcare. There's also a lot of healthcare folks here who actually have a very significant representation of the Brazilian healthcare system representing this area to lead to our sponsors. And I know that also at ABC, you have chosen to focus a lot on the healthcare sector, right? Could you tell us why this focus and what you think are the biggest opportunities within the healthcare space here and also everywhere else in the world?
Sure, and I've only been working in healthcare for about 7 or 8 years, and so there are a lot of people here I know who are legends in the field, so it's an honor to speak to you about your field. I should be careful how confident I am. But I think healthcare is also another area that's just fascinating because of how broken the information infrastructure is, right? So if you want innovation to go quickly, let's say that the Boston Children's Hospital, they built a pediatric heart surgery application, and they were able to cut down problems by 30% by using tons of different data and bringing it in real time as they're doing these things. And it's great, and now they want to take that and bring it somewhere else. And in order to bring it to another hospital, you have to rebuild it almost from scratch because the infrastructure is not there, right? So there's no innovation infrastructure. There's no way to build something in one place and have it win by going to thousands of places, which means innovation doesn't happen as much because if I knew I could give someone $20 million to do this really smart app, basically for some type of surgery or some type of thing at a hospital, and then I knew that if it worked, I could bring it to 5,000 places, I'd be able to give them $20 million. If I give them $20 million just to do it one place, my investors are going to tell me I'm crazy. Right? So the investment in innovation in healthcare is much, much less than it should be in a lot of areas. And of course, when you say healthcare, there's lots of different areas of healthcare. So I'm talking about healthcare IT right now, and that has to do with the data for innovation. There is pretty simple. More complicated is the innovation for value-based healthcare, right? I'm sure everyone here knows how obviously the incentives for how to make healthcare more efficient. require us to understand how expensive episodes of care should be as opposed to fee-for-service. And so there's some very interesting questions there, how you harness incentives using IT. And then, of course, there's a whole other area of healthcare, which is the bio side. Actually, if you were to ask what's one of the most interesting things going on right now in Silicon Valley, I think it's the renaissance in biology, intersection of technology and biology, and that's a whole other side right now that's very exciting. I'm sure we can talk about more. So healthcare is one of the biggest parts of our economy. There's tons of areas where it's obviously not doing what it could be if it was using data well. So I think that's our job as entrepreneurs and technologists to working on it.
Well, two of the amazing companies that you co-founded, Palantir and OpenGov, have successfully disrupted government, improving security, transparency, and efficiency. In Brazil, we are now starting to create a health-tech ecosystem. As a matter of fact, there's a few congressmen actually here at this conference, which are very honored to have, which are very much, aligned with this creation of this health-tech ecosystem. But of course, we're still struggling with many obstacles that are particular to the government sector. Could you tell us about the obstacles you faced when founding these companies and the biggest lessons you have learned? And also, if you could tell a little bit about health tech as well in general.
Sure.
And I know you're also.
I've built companies here, so it's an area of great passion for me. It's maybe a little bit of an unhealthy focus because government's probably the hardest area in the world to work. But because it's the hardest, it's also the most broken. This is the funny thing. Everyone always says, why don't you work in an interesting area where it's easy? But the areas where it's easy to work in, they're already pretty functional in our economy. They're already kind of close to what they should be. The areas that are hard to work in, that's where you find the biggest gaps, right? So one of the most important questions, again, as an entrepreneur to me, is where is it now? And where could it be if it was using technology, using processes well? And government is no question the area with by far the biggest gaps. I haven't spent much time in Brazil. I will give you a government example in Brazil that one of my e-commerce companies that ships here from China goes as fast as it can. It takes about 10 days to drop ship to here to our consumers. When we drop ship to consumers in Brazil right now, it takes about 48 days. I think it has something to do with the government and how they run things there. So I think maybe Brazil also has similar issues that we have to work on here in America. And so government is interesting. There's a lot of really competent people that I found in government, but it tends to be very high volatility. So you'll have a very competent person working next to like a very lazy bureaucrat who's just very difficult. Whereas in businesses, you tend to have similar competence in an organization. Government's very spiky. So in government, I think you have to find these competent, mission-driven people that do exist, and you have to partner with them, and you have to be like 10 times better than what they're already doing. So if you're slightly better, no one cares, and it doesn't matter. But if you're 10 times better, if what you're doing is so much better, that it kind of shames everyone, and they kind of have to go along with it. It's just so obviously the right thing. And because there are some of these mission-driven people, things do get done. And so OpenGov is one example. We're in about 2,000 governments, mostly in North America right now, mostly cities and states and state agencies and whatnot. And that, it was really about getting these early adopters on our side, making something that fixed the processes for how they do budget, how they do other things. That's another big thing in government. You want to find the existing process that you're improving. It's very hard, in my experience, to sell to government something entirely new. They just don't have a budget for it, and they're not going to make a budget for you. That's going to take forever. But if you find a process they're already doing, and you can help them do it a lot better, then you show this working a lot better, and then you kind of get allies and show it off. Eventually you kind of inspire enough / shame enough people that you can kind of roll it out.
You often say that a key question to ask in Silicon Valley, which in a way you address, what's possible now that wasn't possible 5 years ago? Do you think that's also the right question to ask in Brazil, not in emerging economies, and sometimes things tend to be a little bit slower?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So I think for the very cutting edge of technology, it's always the most important question here in Silicon Valley is what's possible now that was not possible 5 years ago. So by way of example, I think mobile phone came about 12 years ago. If you tried to build like Uber or Didi or Lyft or whatever 13, 14 years ago, it doesn't make any sense. It's not possible. No one can do that. If you try to build them now, you're over a decade too late. You're not going to get 100x on your money anymore, right? So it's a really interesting question as a venture capitalist is what are these new things now? When you go back in Silicon Valley the last 100 years, you get these consistent waves of companies that all came about because something new was possible at any given time. We've written a lot of pieces on this. You can go back and see all the waves. But so the question is, I think that is clearly the right question in Silicon Valley. Right now, there's the renaissance in biology. There's these new kind of changes in healthcare regulation. There's always had new things going on right now we're focused on. I think it's becoming more of the right question to ask in a lot of the emerging world as well. I think 20 years ago, and 20 years ago it was not at all, right? And this is where I just defer to you two wherever you go. But my bias is that in the past, emerging economies were a lot later stage to adopt certain things. But I think if you look at like the economy of Brazil right now, I think the best model in the world, rather than having like developed and emerged, I think there's 4 classes of wealth, you can map it out. And I think Brazil has some in the very first class, a bunch in the second and third, and only a tiny bit in the fourth. And so Brazil's economy in a microcosm actually is like partially like our economy in one area, but then also has these other kind of more emerging and less developed economies as part of it. But I think that part of it that is more developed is right at the same stage we are, in a sense. It is ready for these new things. And frankly, the level of technological sophistication and engineers I'm seeing all around the world, including in Brazil, I do think they are ready to adopt a lot of these new things. And so I think at the same time, there probably are some other things we've built that haven't gotten into much of the economy yet, but I don't think it's wrong to focus on the front end as well. There's probably some combination of both that matters.
Well, regulatory worries and challenges is definitely something that worries any innovator, any founder. The same is definitely true for Brazil, where of course the regulatory framework is still very
Here, it might be scary right there.
So the question to you is like, how do you see regulations limiting or accelerating innovation across different industries, and what can be done to improve the operating environment in the US and all Brazil, especially Brazil? And one of the things I want to do this conference is make sure that there's a lot of takeaways we're going to be sending to the government, how they can actually,
The smart people.
what they have to do here to make things happen, right? So,
Yeah, this is a big issue in the United States, and it's very controversial, so I apologize ahead of time if I've had people who have different views on these things. Obviously, you need it. I believe you do need obviously a healthy regulatory state, and there's rules for regulation in America. That said, right now in America, the average state is about 9 million words of regulation, and at the federal level, we have about 1 million commands. And this grew exponentially over the last few decades, and it becomes somewhat complicated for certain types of business. I think the interesting question about it we're working on, actually I have a company in this area as well, working with a bunch of states, is the information theory of regulation. So when I start a new business, or my friends start a new business, if something doesn't work out, you have to kind of adjust it and change it as you go along. But if someone puts a new regulation in a state industry, if it doesn't work out, oftentimes it just stays there for a very long time. So there's not really a very good feedback process. So the question is, how should that information feedback process work in the regulatory state? And so one of the things we were helping them with in a couple of states is just like taking a there's 19 agencies per state on average, take like a very narrow agency regulating, like HHS, regulating a certain part of healthcare. And certain states have regulations about where nurses can practice and where they can't, and how close a doctor has to be. And some of the doctors groups in America are these very powerful groups, some might call them cartels, that put in these very strong regulations where even if common sense might say that you don't need a doctor there, they'll have a rule the doctor has to be within like 10 miles, the doctor has to be in the room or whatever it is. And then of course, you compare those states' costs in these areas to other states, and it's much more expensive. It's much harder to deliver healthcare to poor people for even certain basic things, because you can't just have a nurse go handle something in a rural area. And that's a very specific example, but there's lots of things like this. And so the question is, for a regulatory state, how do you go back and review things? How do you compare to other states? States are a really cool way to do it, because when you have multiple states, you can have Iowa compare itself to Kentucky, compare itself to Ohio, and you can see, oh wow, we have 10 times as many regulations in this area, and our job growth has been much, much slower in this area. Maybe there's something we're doing here, and maybe our safety is not even as good either. So maybe there's something we're doing here where we shouldn't have all these. Let's go back and do a review. And there's 17 states in the U.S. now that have official regulatory review processes. But the problem is, if you don't capture that process with technology, a lot of times it doesn't even happen because people are busy and they don't care, and there's no accountability. So by capturing and putting technology into these processes, you can create accountability in the regulatory state. You can create this way it checks itself. And I can talk about it all day, but I think regulations in general have probably slowed down economic growth somewhere between 100 and 150 basis points in America, is my view, which doesn't sound like much, but if you look at America versus Mexico, if we had grown 110 basis points slower the last 100 years, we'd have the exact same size per capita GDP as Mexico. So 100 basis points actually does matter a lot over time, and there's a lot there that I think we need to fix and be smarter about.
Question. Well, we usually view technological disruptions as a positive development towards innovation, towards development. There are always a lot of concerns when it comes to disrupting traditional industries when it comes in terms of the job loss, right? Mm-hmm. In Brazil especially, there's a big concern about the automation of low-skilled jobs. How do you view these risks in the face of innovation? How do you balance those?
Yeah, well, it gets to the heart of another really important question a lot of us are dealing with and debating about. It's actually interesting you asked it for Brazil, because I'm so used to answering it for the U.S. But I can see how it'd be scarier if more of the economy is a little bit differently that way. I'm generally of the belief that if you look at the last 150 years, like every kind of 60, 70 years, actually the last 300 years, every 60, 70 years, we replaced about half the jobs. This is about the number. Some people say 90, but it's just depending how you look at it, we've been replacing half the jobs pretty consistently multiple times over the last few centuries. And I think the thing that children are not taught today in school is about productivity and how productivity equates to wealth, right? So I think when you say, where does our wealth come from? Why are we wealthy? Why are we wealthy compared to the past? It's the productivity per person really matters. And so if we hadn't been replacing those jobs, we'd be less productive, we'd be poorer, the whole society would be less prosperous. It's a very unintuitive thing politically for people to understand, right? So I think healthcare, though, is a great place actually to start with productivity. So right now in America, I don't know the numbers in Brazil, but in America, if you look at the entitlements in healthcare, about 13 times our GDP has been promised in terms of future healthcare entitlements over the next couple of decades. It's a very, very large amount of debt. Actually, if we were a company, we'd be insolvent, right? But we kind of ignore it because we're a reserve currency and we can get away with it. But if you think about that, you think, okay, we promised this massive healthcare spending. What do we need to do? And the obvious answer is we have to raise productivity in healthcare. We absolutely have to automate things in healthcare that are expensive. We have to automate various workers because if we don't, we can't afford healthcare. And I think it's a really helpful thing to think about. Like, don't think about the people who might lose their jobs in healthcare right now. In America, we're at very low unemployment. We have 5 million unfilled vocational jobs. There's massive amounts of jobs needed. But think about actually providing healthcare to poor people. And if you think about it that way, it's very obvious. Of course, you want healthcare to be cheaper. Everyone's society benefits from that. I think this is a very hard thing. It's very unintuitive because politicians love talking about jobs. But jobs are not what made the country wealthy over the last 100, 200, 300 years. It's productivity. And productivity actually has been growing much more slowly than we like the last 20, 30 years, which is one of the reasons wages seem to have stagnated. We have to get productivity going again. So it's very ironic we're all worried about technology replacing jobs right at the point where actually it has not been doing that. Productivity has actually been very stagnant the last 30 years. And unintuitively, it's actually better for everyone if productivity does go up. That said, there can be periods of disruption that are very scary for a lot of reasons, including politically. And so it is something we're going to have to navigate carefully.
At HBC, I understand your motto is, the world is broken, let's fix it. Right. How does that motto apply to Brazil and I think to everybody in this room?
Well, I think the basic idea, what's so fun about being a business person, an entrepreneur, a technologist, is that almost every industry you look at, if you were to design the industry again today from scratch, it's just so extremely different than how it works today. It's the nature of humanity, is that almost everything that's been built and been created has this inertia from the past, where it's now in a very, very different state. And sometimes that's because of special interest. Sometimes just because there's these big corporations that are kind of slow to change. Sometimes it's because there's new technology and no technologies has come along and tried to apply to this area yet. But I think it's really fun to be in a position where you can look almost anywhere and say, here's how I think this thing should work, here's how it should look, and here's how I'm going to get it there. And that's our job, is to go and fix these things that are not working the way they should be.
There's a few questions here from the audience. Let me try to read a few. Do you think there are industries that are immune to disruption?
I think that there are industries where the incumbents are very likely to win because they have very large moats. I think it'd be very, very hard, especially the way America's working today, to build a new kind of global investment bank. It's it's an integrated bank, just because the way these things work. I think it's probably better to sell to the banks than help them fix themselves. And I think it's probably true for a lot of hospitals as well. I don't think there's the hospitals that are going to go away. But that said, I think the way the banks operate, the way the hospitals operate are going to change, and there will be some that outcompete others if they adopt technology and processes better.
There's another question here from Carlos Costa, saying the world will reach 11 billion people in the century. You know that 11 billion in the century?
It's a lot of babies.
Yeah. So, what are the major? What do you think are the major disruptive opportunities this phenomenon will create, as far as such an increase in population?
Oh well, I guess we're at like 7 point something right now. Actually, this is one where I'm also somewhat controversial, so I have to apologize. But if you actually look at
when people are controversial.
So I flew up here from Santa Barbara this morning. My family was there for a wedding, and even in California, which is one of the most populous states in the union, it's basically like all empty land that you're flying over. And I do like having some open land. I like the environment. I think it's great. But we use about 2.5% of the land in America. We don't really use our oceans at all. We don't really use Antarctica at all. And what's really interesting is environmentally, as people get beyond a certain income, they tend to contribute back more to the environment than they hurt it. So it's like India and China are apart right now, where they're actually very harmful to the environment. As you start to grow, you actually start helping the environment more as you get wealthier. So I think as we get more productive in society, we actually be able to use more wealth to fix the environment. And there's actually plenty of room here in the world. So this is a longer conversation, but I'm very bullish that there's no problem at all having 15, 20 billion people in a wealthy society around the world. And if you look at it, there's all this open area everywhere. So I totally disagree with this worry about population. However, people who are very extreme right now on the East Coast and who are having this whole movement on not having kids, and I think because their view of the world is so wrong, I think it's fine if they don't want to have kids, but I'm going to have a lot of them.
Well, that's actually really useful. Another question here says, HBC looks for broken models, and in Brazil there is a land with plenty of broken systems and opportunities.
Yes.
Now we're in a difficult situation. What is the fund's take on this market? How do you look at Brazil, or do you look at Brazil? Or will you look at Brazil?
We actually, well, thanks in part to you, Rodrigo, we're getting to know some great people there, and we are actually planning on spending a lot more time there. I've made a few very small personal investments just to practice and get to know people down there. And I think the number one thing, of course, is just making sure there's a good order and rule of law. As Brazil, I think has gotten better at over time. And I think for me, the other thing is there has to be top talents, and I think there's a lot of top talent we're seeing there. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to get more involved there and do more in Latin America, Brazil in particular.
Joe, you're 36 years old. Okay, you co-founded so many companies. You run one of the most successful venture capitals here in the area, in the world nowadays. You're an amazing guy. I mean, there's a lot of students here. There's a lot of people that are just willing to hear advices, willing to hear. If you were to just a couple of minutes, what do you tell the young audience here? That they should do and how they should follow their dreams, and what would be the advice to the young audience that's actually here and of course listening to us the live stream?
Sure.
As far as how to position themselves in this new world.
Well, I think actually what I'm doing right now is not a good role model because I'm involved in too many things, and I enjoy that at this point. But I wasn't always trying to do lots of things. I think it's really important when you're starting off to get to know one area really, really well, and it has to be something you're passionate about. This is one of the kind of interesting things about how the mind works. If the mind's not really passionate about something, it's not as good at it. When I was a chess player when I was young, and they did all these brain scans of all these top chess players in the world. And it's really interesting because the top chess players, the ones who are the very best, better than me by far, would activate these emotional parts of their brain, and they'd actually use all these other parts of their brain to start encoding information, understanding what was going on. It's because they were so intensely interested in what they were doing, they were using much more of their attention in their mind. The other example on that one on the chess side is I'm friends with the current world champion, and I asked him how he practiced, and he said he would get a certain amount of homework per week, but he'd only focus on half the homework that he was given that he was interested in, and ignore the part he wasn't as interested in, because if he did the part he was more interested in, he'd actually learn it much better and find out much more. So I think finding some area you're very passionate about is really, really important, and really learning it well. And then I think trying to have strong opinions lightly held is also really important. It's actually trouble to defend people, but I think it's really good to try to form your own opinions about why is this broken, how should this work, what should this look like, and then find smart people to talk to about them. And if you talk to a lot of really smart people, and you start with interesting opinions, you kind of iterate as you go along, you'll oftentimes figure things out that other people won't. So I think maybe the combination of those two is pretty helpful. And then I think finally, the reason all these companies and all these things work is just you have to try to find the smartest people and convince them to work with you. I think that's probably one of my better skills, just having also smart friends and convince to help me with things. But I think being at Stanford is a huge advantage for that, because kids are at Stanford. There's lots of people all around you. Make sure you're getting to know people. Make sure you get to know what they're good at, and make sure try to be convincing them to work with you. Because that's really how you succeed in the world, is having lots of smart people help you with stuff.
There's a question here from somebody who's interested in healthcare that I found interesting, saying that Brazil is aging faster than almost all countries in history. How would you invest in healthcare with this trend in mind? And actually, there's a follow-up question that says, which is one of the very successful investments I know, is Oscar Health a potential solution?
Interesting. Well, I think there's people who know healthcare a lot better than me. I think there's obviously some very interesting things to do as people get older. There's just the obvious things. Nothing strikes me. This is not one of the obvious ones. Oscar's a healthcare company my friends started out of New York. was trying to do some things with data and with processes that were somewhat disruptive, which it was actually kind of cool. As soon as we started doing certain things with Oscar, we were the first ones to offer free telemedicine. A bunch of the biggest companies copied us and whatnot. And there's all sorts of ways in which they use data, which hadn't been done before. It's kind of shocking when you go into these industries not knowing them very well. Healthcare insurance is very complicated in America. I'm sure it is in Brazil too. And one of these, like, we talked to these doctor groups. There's a pediatric group in Long Island, and we actually took it out of the system. It wasn't working. It came to us and said, "Why do you take us out of the system?" We said, "Well, you're conducting over 3 times as many tests as every other group in our system. And it's really expensive." And they said, "Oh wow, no one's ever told us this before." And it was just shocking to me. There's a group that's like doing something 3 times as expensive as everyone else, and they weren't even aware of it. That's kind of like, that was like the status quo in healthcare. This was maybe 6-7 years ago. And so I think there's lots and lots of solutions in which you make healthcare a lot cheaper if you use data well, you use common sense well, and then you start using value-based care. So I assume that applies to old people just as much as young people. Old people are more expensive, so it's going to be a good challenge for healthcare businesses in Brazil.
I will just keep on questions till the time to stop. Besides the 4 industries in focus that we have at the conference, are there obvious industries that you're bullish about at APC?
One of the new ones we're bullish about that I haven't been focused on for a while is actually the defense industry. And this is not one that people hold conferences about. They're uplifting.
Sure.
But I'll tell you, I've spoken. I was at MIT and Harvard, and I have a lot of things around Stanford. And I asked kids, like, who is looking at defense, and literally none of them are going into the defense industry. And America spends an insane amount of money on defense. And I started one of these companies because I built Palantir in my 20s. That was a big focus of mine. It was a global defense company, and it was more on the software side. I started to learn these companies on the hardware side too. And what I realized is they've evolved to the point where they're very good at innovation theater, but not innovation. So what I mean by that is their job is not necessarily to innovate. Their job is to convince people they're innovating. This is actually a terrifying fact. Because you look at China and you look at other countries these days, which I think are frankly much scarier countries. People might disagree with me, but I think it's actually very scary what China's doing. But I think they're very competent. And so unlike America, China takes their best and the brightest and they bring them into defense and they innovate. And there's actually areas where a lot of us believe China's innovating much faster on the defense side than America, despite spending less money. And I think it's actually better for world peace if America continues to be very strong and doesn't fall way behind there. So that's an area where I think there's a lot of opportunities, and so we're open, and that I think it's important for America to be better. So let's spend more time on that.
Great. Well, I think the sign DN has actually been raised to me. We hear that as older guys, we're supposed to be mentoring young people. He's been my mentor ever since I got here, so I hope you got a little bit of this as much as I've been getting. That's a name that I'm sure you're going to be listening for many years to come. Joe is a great guy. You're doing amazing things. So thank you very much for coming here. I know you had to fly just for this, so we really appreciate it. And thank you very much.